Hello. So we're going to talk about school, everyone's favorite topic when school just ended. And we should probably do this session maybe by webinar again in August when everyone's getting ready to go back to school. And before I begin, I should say that we have a lot of wonderful resources in the community and people here who are really very expert on this topic, and I think a lot of you know them, but I think probably in the audience we have Brian Denger and Jill Castle and James Poisky somewhere. But other wonderful resources include the men in our community who've graduated from high school with 504s and IEPs, and then have gone on to have very successful college and graduate school careers, who can help answer some questions for you about what kinds of plans worked for them. But my goal today is just to give an overview of what and what I decided to do was a side-by-side comparison of what a 504 plan is, what an IEP is, what they aren't, and then some recommendations for accommodations that are frequently included in plans for students who have Duchenne and Becker, and then ways that families have successfully engaged their school teams. So this is just going to be a very quick snapshot because we have 20 minutes to do it. And here we go. So the first thing is that there's no right or wrong way to do this, and that this should be a partnership with your school team. And maybe ask yourself, how do we engage the team to begin with? Because we all know that our kids spend a lot of time at school. On a given day, I drop my son off at school, sometimes by 7 a.m. for before school, and then I pick him up at after school much later than I'd like to admit. So our kids are there a lot of the day. And so if we keep a really good communication, open dialogue going with the school, this could be a really good resource for us as our children grow into young men. And so oftentimes we recommend that parents start with an in-service. And especially as your kids are younger and you're first getting the diagnosis, there are a lot of terrific resources on your clinic team. And through your certified Duchenne Care Center, through if you're going to an MDA clinic, there are often social workers or school professionals on the team who can be available to you to either talk to the school, if you give permission for that, or to even come to the school. The other thing is that we often recommend that when it's developmentally and age appropriate, that you involve your child in the planning, and we can talk more about that. And we talked about that in the panels in the last couple days and asked the young men if they attended their IEP meetings or their 504 meetings. Were they a part of that when they got to later middle school and high school? Did they see how their parents advocated for them? Because at some point that becomes their life plan. The goals that are incorporated into there are, of course, about them. And then when they get to college, they're going to have to learn how to navigate their world and go to the administrator themselves and ask for changes and accommodations. And the best place to learn that is to watch you model it. So just start thinking about how do you start to have them start watching you in action. And then if you're going to be doing presentations to peers, which, of course, I am a big proponent for doing that, always include your student or your child in that. Don't make them paranoid about your having conversations to my friends about me without me in the room. And there are some really great tools available. I've heard Jill Castle's developed some really great things. When I was at MDA, we wrote something called, I wrote something called the chocolate chip cookie presentation that we taught all the HCSCs in the nation how to use and disseminate, and we send that out through PPMD now. So there are some really great things that you can do with young kids to really get them to understand and be very inclusive of a young person who's starting to manifest symptoms of a physical disability. And most importantly, know that you're not alone. You have a lot of really terrific resources in this community. So I'm just going to, I'm going to do this very quickly, and we're going to make these slides available. But I think sometimes people get frustrated when the 504 isn't working for them, or you're with a school system that maybe isn't being super cooperative and is maybe reticent to offer an IEP. And there's a breakdown in communication between what the difference between a 504 and an IEP is. So I want to start with the basics. And I'm sure there are a lot of people here that have worked this out already, but I know there are people in this room that are just starting. So I think it's worth taking the time to do this. So the first thing is a 504 is not about special education services. A 504 it refers specifically to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and it was written in 1973, so it's not really a new piece of legislation. And for those of you who are in the transition meeting, we actually referenced the Rehabilitation Act and Section 504 yesterday when we talked about fair housing. So this is broad. This doesn't apply just to school. It applies to access. It's a civil rights law, and it doesn't even apply specifically to children or students. So I just want you to keep that in mind when we talk about that. And in contrast, an IEP refers to the IDEA, which is the Individualized Disabilities Education Act. So it is an education bill. The last update was in 2004, and it's specifically a federal special education law for students with disabilities. So just looking at that, they're vastly different, okay? And so there are two requirements for a 504 plan qualification. A student must have a disability, and there's a very broad definition of disability under a 504, and the disability must interfere with your access to the general ed classroom. Again, it's about access. It's about physical access. Again, remember, we talked about it yesterday when we talked about fair housing laws and access to housing. So it's about access with 504. And then with IEP, students have to have at least one of 13 specific disabilities, and there's a specific list of disabilities for qualification. And students in our Duchenne community often, because again, if you're starting this journey and starting this dialogue with the school, it's usually very early in the diagnosis. And so the category that young people with Duchenne often, and Becker often qualify under, is what's called OHI, which is other health impair, or other health impairment. Sometimes there's an orthopedic category, orthopedic disability, or developmental delay that people qualify under, but it's usually OHI. And then the disability has to affect the student's educational performance, because again, you qualify for services because the goal of the school is to get you an education. So there has to be a barrier to education established, because the goal of the school is to make sure that they provide educational services to you. And then the other thing that is a part of an IEP that I think is really important, and again, you're going to see a trend in what I talk about, is there mandates that there's a transition plan for students who are 16 and over, and then a behavior plan if that's appropriate for your child. So that's in an IEP, but again, not in a 504 because it's a different kind of system. Again, I'm going to go fast because there's a bunch in here. So a 504 is a plan for access to learning, a goal to remove physical barriers, so you're going to see a lot of trends. An IEP is about services, okay? So it does not specify where those services happen. It doesn't have to happen in a special classroom somewhere with only certain students. It's about the service package, all right? An IEP is a legal document, and the 504 doesn't have a standard format, all right? And then I think this next piece is really important, and it's something that if your child has an IEP, you've probably heard this buzzword a lot. If you've attended sessions, I think I've heard Jill Castle do really great sessions where this comes up a lot if you've gone to any training somewhere. But you'll hear fair and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. You hear that a lot, that your child is legally entitled to a fair and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. That is guaranteed through the IDEA. And then a 504 plan usually involves a team who draws it up, and here are people who are all involved in that team. An IEP requires that a team draws it up, and here's a list of people who participate in the design of the IEP. All right, so again, you're seeing that there are a lot of legal requirements around the IEP that the school system are bound to. 504, here's a list of what's usually required included: specific accommodations, the name of who's going to provide it, and the name of the person who's going to implement it. An IEP includes the annual educational goals for the students, and these have to be measured, and there are operational measures around that. The services that the student will receive, the duration of those services, and when those will start, and this is very specific. There is a present level statement included, and this statement is a snapshot of how your child is doing. In this statement, I think I've seen a lot of parents kind of gloss over this. This is really important, and this is important that you have a hand in writing the statement, or you feel comfortable with what this statement says, because this statement really directs the goals of the IEP. So ask to see a draft of it before the IEP meeting. Ask to know what's in it, and then inform it. Accommodations to school and learning environment, modifications to academic program, a plan for standardized testing, and a plan for inclusion in the general ed program. Really important. All right, parents should be notified. So in a 504, you need to be told if there are going to be any significant changes. The notification doesn't have to be in writing, but it usually is. For an IEP, again, this is legal. This is a legal document. Request for changes to the IEP must be made in writing prior to the change, and parents have a legal right to do what's called stay put while there's a dispute being resolved. So again, you have a lot more legal rights with the IEP. The team is legally required to review the IEP annually. Some parents ask for meetings more often, and the student must be reevaluated every 3 years. In both cases, there's no charge to the family for any of the services. In a 504, you're certainly allowed to use assistive tech. In an IEP, assistive tech services are funded when needed. In a 504, the state does not receive any funding, additional funding for any services that are provided to you, and IDEA funds are not provided to the school for anyone who's receiving 504 services. So if you have a school that says, you know what, we can do everything that you're asking under a 504, that's great. And there are plenty of people in our community who do receive wonderful supports and services under a 504. But that's at the cost of the school. They're not going to receive any additional funding to do that. Whereas in an IEP, services are federally funded. So there are federal funds that go to the state, and I think it's about a level of 40%. So there's still a cost to the school system, but there is funding that comes to the state, to the school system for IEP services. And then there are two different methods if you have compliance issues related to a 504 and an IEP, and I list what the routes to address compliance issues. Of course, always start at the school. But then if you work your way up the chain, you have two different modes. And you'll notice it's the Office of Civil Rights because it's a civil rights bill for a 504, and it's the State Department of Education if you have a problem with your IEP. Okay, so there's a list of steps. So now I'm going to move forward and talk about an IEP only. I'm going to move off the 504 and talk about an IEP because I've done a side-by-side. So if you're going to be establishing an IEP, here are the general steps that are involved in an IEP. First, you engage with your child's school team, and I'm a big proponent, again, of doing an in-service with the teachers and the team just to bring them along with you and let them know what's going on. And more often than not, then the team says, I think we need to talk about maybe doing an IEP or talk about an eligibility meeting. A request is made that the child be evaluated. You can generate that request. You don't have to wait for the school to do it. The child's evaluated by a multidisciplinary team. You can ask for a copy of the evaluations prior to the meeting. So I've highlighted in red, I think, steps that are really important about empowering you. Eligibility is decided based on the evaluations, and then the child is deemed eligible or ineligible. I'm going to move on with this list, assuming that you're deemed eligible. The meeting is scheduled. You are a member of the team, and you can invite anyone you want to that meeting. Remember, you're the quarterback of this, so it's really important that you feel empowered, that you know when the date is set, and if the date is not convenient for you, you ask for another date. Okay? Request a draft prior to the meeting. When then the IEP is held and written. Come prepared with your questions, concerns, ideas, and proposed goals. And I'm going to give you some suggestions. Again, I talked about the present level statement and how important that is, and that should be in that draft that you got. Now, you are going to be asked to sign that you attended the IEP meeting. They're going to pass around the sign-in to everybody who's at the meeting. That does not mean that you signed a contract or you agree to everything that just happened. That means it's a sign-in for who's at the meeting. So you don't have to be afraid to sign it. And if you walk out of the room and you didn't feel good about something that happened in there, you didn't just buy a car and walk off the lot. You don't have to worry about it. You have time to appeal and have something changed. And then, all the progress is measured operationally. There are measured goals, and then the IEP is reviewed annually. Okay, there are a list of recommended accommodations for students who have Duchenne and Becker. And this is available, and we can put this up on our website if it's not already there. But there's a list of recommendations for physical therapy. And you have to remember that physical therapy goals in school are very different than physical therapy goals in the community. Because this is about being able to be successful in the school environment. This isn't the same as your physical therapy goals for maintaining your life and your journey with Duchenne. And then adapted physical education. This does not mean being pulled out of the PE class and having separate PE. This means how to stay in the general PE classroom and adapting that class so that it works for you and that you can have recreation with your peers safely. And so there are recommendations for how to do that. Occupational therapy. If you have an IEP, you have a legal right to request an assistive technology evaluation and have the school pay for it. And there are certain buzzwords you need to know, and that's one of them. And look at what kinds of technology should be made available to you. Okay, and then an OT consultation. And OT consultations are often for body positioning, whether or not you should have a wedge for writing and handwriting, which can also oftentimes help with cramping, fine motor function, assistive devices, etc. Modified written assignments, computers at school, and then there's a whole list of other accommodations. If you have multiple levels, use for the elevator, key to the elevator, additional textbooks, designing the class schedule so the classes are close together so you're not walking all the time, emergency evacuation plans, a designated safe room in the school, and numerous personnel in the school who are going to stay with your child during an emergency. And that should be arranged with the fire department so they know that's the room you go to during a fire emergency, and that's where the children who have disabilities will be. And teachers with broken legs, by the way, need to know too, and we've had that come up in schools. Field trips. Need to take your child into consideration ahead of time. And that doesn't even mean, well, of course, this is a trip to the museum, so it's no problem, because here in DC, sometimes the buses park blocks away. And so if the bus is going to park blocks away, what's the plan for dropping my kid off in front of school? And it doesn't mean that you, as the parent of the child with a disability, has to be the chaperone every time. That's not acceptable. So what's the plan? And those things get written into the IEP. And so the list goes on and on. But general principle is there's no such thing as one size fits all. And there are some school systems that have done a really good job of making a 504 work, but you just need to know it's not a legal document, it's not a law specific to education or students, it's a law about physical access, whereas an IEP refers to a law about education and special education. It's about a partnership with the school system. And the student with Duchenne and Becker is the central player in this. So as soon as you feel like your child is developmentally ready, think about how to incorporate him, because these are really important ways to build self-advocacy goals. And to that point, here are some potential IEP goals to consider building in. When you write the goals for the IEP, a self-advocacy goal, and talk to the team about who on the team will start to work with them and what the goals will be. And you then ratchet up what that goal looks like as he gets older and goes through school. A socialization goal for social skills and what that will look like and what kinds of interactions that will include throughout the school. And then when they get into high school, community mobility. So learning how to navigate whatever the community system is. So here in the DC area, it might be metro or using buses or getting from point A to point B in the grocery store, because that's how young people become independent and confident. So those are some goals that can be worked on and are legally possible for the school system. And then I'm including this, I'm not going to read through it all right now, but these are questions that I often see come up on our social media pages, and these are legal issues by precedent that will be relevant for our Duchenne community about, the school system has to provide a nurse if the child wants to attend school, and there's the legal citation, whether parents have to pay the legal fees if they prevail in a lawsuit. The school system does not have to reimburse a private school tuition if the child is placed in private school before eligibility. The private school tuition must be covered by the public school if the public school district fails to provide an appropriate education. So there's a list there. So when we post this, you have the citations and you know what your rights are. And then I gave you some acronyms that come up very frequently, so you know what they are, because everyone speaks a different language. And one of them I'm just going to point out is PTI, which is a Parent Training and Information Center. And there is one in every state, because it's a federally funded program to the state. And if you don't know where your PTI is in your state, Google it and find it, because these people are amazing resources in every state and will help you navigate any problems that come up. And if you're having a hard time dealing with your school, call these people, and they will help you. So thank you.